It's more like the concept of nirvana as seen in spiritual circles, Buddhism, meditation and all that. I'd say it's a mental state you can reach by working on a whole load of slightly easier to quantify components. But once you have those in place, it's like a final boss that you can unlock, and a final state of mind which everything else contributes towards. It's different to the arrogance you see in some folk who aren't quite as good as they seem to think they are. It's more of a self-assuredness that comes with knowing that whether you're out to play a school concert or a wedding or headline the pyramid stage at Glasgow, let's say, you'll have earned the right to be there and be ready to give the performance of a lifetime every time, whether you're playing to 2 people or 200,000.
Hi and welcome to Big Gig Energy, a podcast by musicians for musicians, helping you get bigger gigs, no matter what level you're at. I'm your host, Steve Leggett, and with 10 years experience as a professional musician, doing everything from pubs and functions to travelling the world in a ukulele boy band, I understand that being a musician is rarely the glamorous experience people make it out to be, and that building your career up to a point where you get to go pro is about the most challenging professional leap of faith there is. But I'm going to use my experience and insight, and maybe a guest or two, to help you activate your own big gig energy and take things to the next level, whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out. So, let's get to it.
So welcome, and here we are, Episode 1, joining such other famous Episode 1s in the Pantheon as Star Wars Episode 1 and Breaking Bad Episode 1. In this first episode, this premiere of the series, I'll be giving a rough overview of exactly what Big Gig Energy is, what it means, and how I'll be helping you attain it. We'll take a look as well at how this series is going to develop. Won't be releasing any of this until I've got the entire season recorded. So by the time you're hearing this, I will have the entire season ready to go, ready to hit send each week. I'll be releasing weekly. And I can confidently say this, knowing that it's going to be ready to go, which is rather exciting, I have to say. We'll get to who I am, but first things first, we should address who are you? Who am I pitching this at? Who am I hoping my listener is in this case? Well, I'd obviously hopefully imagine you're a musician of some description. Maybe you're a hired gun. Maybe you're, still learning at school. Maybe you are semi-professional and you sort of work full-time in the week and then you go out on the weekend and play then. Or maybe you're fully professional and you get all of your income from gigging and nothing else, and you've somehow found time to do this, presumably while you're driving down the M6 at whatever time at night, so thanks for having me with you. Either way, whatever level you're at, and I'm hoping to pitch this to musicians of all levels, there might be something here of use to you, and if not, something new, something that will affirm stuff that you already know and approaches you already take. I think most of the approaches that I'll be looking at in the course of this series are things that most serious professional musicians and most really successful people will already have taken on, which is not to say you can be successful and not have taken all these approaches on, but they certainly won't hurt. Either way, what I'm hoping is that if you're any of the above or just glancing sideways at the music industry, with any luck I can be of some assistance and offer a bit of a fresh outlook on things. So I suppose the biggest question right now is, what exactly is Big Gig Energy, this thing that I've named the podcast after? I'm going to be running with it in quite a few different directions going forward. What exactly does it mean? I define it as an attitude, a state of mind, not entirely unlike a certain other big something energy pertaining to something size related, but in this case it's specifically related to how you approach your work as a musician, how you approach individual gigs and getting them. It's more like the concept of nirvana as seen in spiritual circles, Buddhism, meditation and all that. I'd say it's a mental state you can reach by working on a whole load of slightly easier to quantify components. But once you have those in place, it's like a final boss that you can unlock, and a final state of mind which everything else contributes towards. It's different to the arrogance you see in some folk who aren't quite as good as they seem to think they are. It's more of a self-assuredness that comes with knowing that whether you're out to play a school concert or a wedding or headline the pyramid stage at Glasgow, let's say, you'll have earned the right to be there and be ready to give the performance of a lifetime every time, whether you're playing to 2 people or 200,000. So that's all really, really exciting, but it's also pretty intangible. It's a difficult thing to pin down, so let's break into exactly what I can do for you, what my offering for you is. And that is, how am I going to help you to attain this big gig energy? Well, what I hope to do in the course of this podcast is to take 2 approaches. Firstly, I'll break down some of the individual things you can do on a personal and a professional level to make sure you're progressing in your career to a level that you're happy with. Everybody's got their level, and for some people it's lower than others, some people it's higher than others. Some people reach a point where they're playing in pubs regularly in covers bands and they're very happy doing that, and that's awesome. Some people never gig beyond their last school concert. And some people, it sort of becomes a bit of an addiction and they spend their entire life just gigging whenever they can, mercilessly. And often those are the people that sort of will be non-stop out there all the time, always pushing for bigger things. And I guess they're the sort of people that I'm particularly aiming this at, people that really want to progress onto bigger gigs and bigger gigs and bigger gigs, rather than just finding a level early on and sitting there. But then even if you are at a level, I like to think that these things can help you get more from that level. So even if you are just, your first paid gig was a pub, and you now routinely play that same pub with some mates, why not make that the best gig possible? Why not make that a big gig every single week, every single time that you play there? So in this first series, I'm going to focus on treating your musical talent very much as a commodity. Music is a commodity. Talent in playing music, the ability to sing, the ability to play, all these things, they're all commodities. They're not gifts, they're not things you do for fun. You might do them for fun, but in a very practical sense, they're not hobbies. They're a commodity which you can leverage for money. You're providing goods or services at the end of the day, which is why you need to approach this with a business head-on. It's so important. I cannot overemphasize enough the extent to which you need to treat music like a business. You need to treat yourself like a product. It sounds really harsh, and I know a lot of people will go into it going, no, I just do this, it's a gift and I want to share it, and that's amazing and good for you. But if you don't treat it with a bit of a business head on, you're going to be taken advantage of. One way or another, people will take the piss, and I don't want that for you. I've been there, I've been in plenty of professional situations where people have taken the piss and they've pushed just a little bit too far, or in some cases they've pushed way too far. And with a bit of hindsight, I wish I knew then what I know now. In Series 2, I'll be looking at some of the things you can do on a much more personal level, so concerns about your gear, how much time you're spending practicing, what you're practicing when you do that, chops, general personal well-being, all that sort of thing. It all combines. Between that and the business, it all combines, and that's how you end up with BGE. That's how you attain that nirvana type state that I'm aiming for here. So the second approach I'll be taking with this podcast will be speaking to some special guests, in the first instance, it's going to be close friends of mine that I've worked with probably a lot in the music industry in northwest England. I imagine they're mostly going to be people from a covers type background. As of yet, I've not organised any of that, but by the time this goes out, if you're hearing this, I will have organised it and it will be awesome. So that's exciting, because if it isn't awesome, I simply won't put this out. Even though it's very much a time of speaking, I guess. At time of speaking, it's very much a work in progress, but an exciting one nonetheless. And with these guests, I'll be asking them a few specific questions to get their insights on things like what, in their mind, makes a gig big. Is it the amount of money you get paid for it? Is it the amount of people you're playing to? Is it the amount of exposure you get from it? Let's say you're doing a TV gig. I mean, I was on CBBS or CBBC, I forget, one of the BBC Kids ones. I got to do a ukulele-based solo behind my head once, and I'm not entirely sure if anyone actually saw it. I think it's still on iPlayer, but regardless, it was pretty damn cool. And that for me was a very big gig, even though all I was playing to was, obviously I was with the guys in my band and the two presenters, one of whom was Poe and the Teletubbies, bizarre. And the crew in this country house in Cheshire somewhere. This is way too early, 1:00 in the morning. It was a bizarre gig, but yeah, that was a big gig for me. So what makes a gig big? That's a question I'll be asking. What their biggest gig so far was, and how they got to that point. If there was a specific thing they did to earn that gig, to whether they had to fight for it, whether they got offered it, what happened exactly for them to get that, and what the details of it were. I find that's always an interesting one to chat about, even just when I'm out, as a wedding musician, for example. You'll often set up pretty early in the day. You'll be there at 5, set up by 7, and then you're going to sit on your hands until 9 or 10 at night. And you'll just be in a room somewhere chatting with a band, and these are things that they're interesting to bring up, particularly if they're a new band you've not worked before. they're interesting questions to ask because everyone's got a different answer and everyone's got a different idea of what makes a big gig. Another thing I'll be asking will be what gave you the confidence to take the plunge and go professional. You know, it's a huge step, as I say in the intro, taking that point where you go, right, I'm ready for this now. I'm going to quit the day job, or I'm going to quit one of the day jobs. I'm going to reduce the hours in my day job, or when I leave uni, as was the case with me, I'm going to be in a position that I don't need to seek other work. I'll just go full-time with the music. All of these things, they're big considerations, and everyone has a different reason and a different point at which they think, yeah, this is the time, this is it. And it's particularly interesting, the difference between obviously covers and originals musicians. The point at which an originals musician gets to go full-time, that's a much harder thing to achieve. So that's going to be quite interesting, although, which I suppose is an interesting point. At what point do you define a professional musician? At what point as a musician are you professional? There's a lot been said about this. There's a whole lot we could debate about it. It might actually be a really good idea for an episode further down the line. For now, I'll just say it's somebody that regularly makes an income, a tangible income from gigging. And then finally, just because, you know, we're musicians and we're here because we love music, I'll probably be asking everyone for an album recommendation. You know, maybe not the best album of all time, maybe not their favourite album, maybe not their most influential album, although frankly that would be a really good one to ask for, but just an album they're listening to at the moment that they would recommend we go and check out on Spotify or whatever. I think that will elicit some really interesting responses. So I'm really looking forward to that part of it. So concluding that section, this is going to break down into sort of two overarching segments. An episode will be one of two formats. It's either going to be me offering a short, probably 15-20 minute long lecture on call it what it is. Call a spade a spade. Like, at the end of the day, this is me talking into a microphone, so it's a lecture as far as I'm concerned, and hopefully it will be educational. And then the other format will be interviews. So who am I? What qualifies me to help you? Why does my opinion matter? Why do my thoughts matter? It's something I'd be asking if I was you, so I feel I should probably answer it. I'm a professional musician with over a decade of experience within the industry. I've played everywhere from deserted bars at 3 a.m. I've done school jazz concerts. I've done football stadiums, cruise ships, theatres, Sunday night at the Palladium, CBBC. I've been there and done a lot. And in that time, I've seen the great, the good, the bad, the ugly sides of the music industry, and I've rubbed shoulders with enough big names to realise they're just regular mortals like the rest of us, albeit often very gifted and well versed in the concepts that this podcast is going to cover, usually pretty darn charismatic as well. But I've played enough gigs in enough settings to spot some overall trends that will work for you, no matter what level of what segment of the industry you're aiming for or working within currently. It's fair to say 2022's been the busiest year of my career so far. We're coming towards the end of November now, and I've done well over 60 gigs this year, which for me, I work full-time as a guitar tech as well. As a semi-pro musician, for me that's a busy year. I've done all sorts from session work and some recording type stuff, which has been an experience to say the least. Just recorded the sessions for a charity Christmas album, and I've been gigging all over the place with all of the cover bands, it feels like. I've got a few guys I work with most of the time, but it's been quite nice being a bit of a gun for hire. Had a residency earlier this year as well at a place in Preston, which was awesome until they replaced the musicians in the band with backing tracks. But, you know, as much as I'm not best pleased about having lost my job to a CD player, it was a very, very good run while it lasted, so, it's worth it. But going forward, in 2023, I'm looking to start taking on clients as a kind of like business development coach for musicians. So I've got the podcast that I'll be using as a way of sort of giving out the macro ideas, the most important concepts. But the idea would be that with my coaching, I could drill down into those ideas and the specifics of them in the specific situation of my clients. It's just that thing about drilling down into specific situations, getting to that sweet spot where every single gig feels like the biggest gig of your career so far. Because at the end of the day, a self-help book will never be as good as having the author in the room with you. Because I love the idea of getting to know some more musicians personally and help them achieve what they want, in addition to obviously still working as a guitar tech and gigging every 5 minutes. So it's going to be a busy year, but I'm well excited for it. So that just about wraps up this episode. I'm super excited about this season, and as I say, going to be focusing on some of the simple things you can do that will help you get objectively better gigs. In future seasons, we'll go deep on some other stuff like imposter syndrome, pre-gig nerves, gear, attitude to self-employment and expenses and tax returns. I wish we'd done tax returns when I was studying music in uni. Just like, what can you claim for, what can't you, is it worth bothering with, all this stuff. Yeah, I can't wait to touch on all of that. Importance of being a good hang, all that sort of thing. But yeah, for now, this season, it's just going to be tangible stuff I can offer, suggestion-wise, that will make a tangible difference to you and your band's career, really. Just basic stuff, which you'd think everyone would know, but I've worked with enough people this year alone that don't get some of this stuff that I think it's worth stating what might seem to be obvious in some cases, and then building up from there. So start with the simple stuff this season, and then we'll just keep getting more and more complicated as we go, I guess. Next episode's going to be about looking at the music industry for what it is as a music industry. It's not a music charity, it's not a music thing you do for fun in your spare. We are looking specifically at the music industry. Call it what it is and acknowledge, because it's an industry, you need to approach it in a certain way. So we're going to be looking at that, which is going to be good, because that's the point at which you realise how easy it can be to start making money from it and to start turning a profit in some cases very quickly, which is jolly exciting. Once you make a start in that, and once you acknowledge it's an industry, that for many people is a huge turning point, a point where you start building that momentum and just massively upgrading the gigs you find yourself playing. So that just about wraps things up. I'll leave it there for now. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Big Gig Energy podcast. This is the bit where I'm obliged to fish for engagement and stuff, so you can find me on Instagram as Big Gig Energy, that's BIGGIGENERGY, or you can get in touch via email at biggigenergy@gmail.com. I'll link anything relevant in the show notes below, but otherwise, if you've had any thoughts on this episode or would be interested in some one-to-one coaching for yourself and or your band, feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, do all the usual social media stuff, I guess, and let's keep the discussion going. Many thanks as ever to all my supporters and collaborators, and as always, best of luck with your next big gig.